Earlier in our show, we talked about the devastating impacts of the heat wave in India, and it's tempting to see such problems as remote. But we know from last summer that heat waves in Canada can be deadly too. In fact, of all the weather-related disasters in 2021, the heat dome was by far the most lethal. According to the BC coroner, 526 people died because of the heat. Joanna Ecom is a managing director at the Intact Centre for Climate Adaptation, and she's the lead author on a report that points to both short and long-term solutions to prevent heat-related deaths. Joanna, hello.
Hello.
The goal of this report is to protect Canadians from what you called a lethal future. Tell me what that looks like.
Basically, we want to draw attention to the urgency of addressing extreme heat. While we think of natural disasters such as flooding or wildfires being the costliest disasters, the cost of extreme heat is measured in lives. So I think, we want to draw attention to practical action that we can actually do to reduce the risk of this happening again, because the deaths that from extreme heat risk are actually avoidable with the right action and information.
Now, you map cities that would be most affected. I'm wondering what gap are you trying to fill with that kind of approach?
So we wanted to make it clear that, the zones of risk of extreme heat are cities because of the urban heat island effect. So our artificial surfaces in our cities actually keep our cities some 10 to 15 degrees warmer than surrounding areas. So cities are the hotspots of global warming, as the IPCC report identified. And what we find is that there's 3 zones across Canada, the valleys of BC, the southern prairies, and then kind of from the Great Lakes down the St. Lawrence River Valley that are particularly high risk of extreme heat events in the future. And these are where our main cities are located. So, most of our population could be at risk.
Here in BC, the province is rolling out an alert system. They just announced it for floods and wildfires. But so far, it doesn't include heat. I'm wondering what your response is to that.
Heat alerts are something that we included as an action in our report, actually. And I live in Montreal, and we actually do have a heat alert system that's fairly sophisticated. That was one of the things that was invested in after the 2018 heat event, where I think 86 people lost their lives in Quebec, and that acted as a kind of catalyst to put more investment in heat alerts. And there's actually an international movement as well to name heat waves, to bring attention to the fact that these are extreme events that can kill people and are really, severe. So there's a kind of international effort to bring more attention for the need for heat alerts too.
Quebec and an organization in Montreal are doing good work on identifying vulnerable populations. What is being done there, and why isn't it being done anywhere else?
So part of the Montreal response was to identify vulnerable people, and actually during heat wave events to have emergency services checking on those people, because the problem with extreme heat is it really hits people who are already vulnerable more hard. So people who are living on their own, people who are elderly, people who have pre-existing medical conditions are particularly exposed to having extreme heat problems. And the problem is it's known as the silent killer, because unlike flooding and wildfire, where it's evident where the problem is, often the problem is not evident when it's extreme heat. So it's actually too late by the time people realize there was a problem in the first place. So the idea of this kind of finding out where vulnerable people are and having a system in place before the event so that people can actually go and check in person on those people to check that they're okay.
Okay, we've talked about mapping. We've talked about identifying vulnerable populations and heat alerts. What can communities or cities do? What else can they do to respond?
One of the purposes of the report was to spell out some of the things that individuals can do, whether that is behavioral change, such as checking on your vulnerable neighbors, friends, and family, like helping them to prepare in advance, whether it's using green infrastructure around your home, such as shade trees or vegetation on your balconies, or whether it's more kind of home retrofits like windows and glazing that let in less heat. There's things that we can be doing, and we're just really not telling people what they can do.
And what about at the city level or the communities level? What other ideas are there?
At the city level, we need to be, mapping vulnerability to extreme heat and really planning how we can support those vulnerable populations, particularly underserved communities who are often living in areas where there's actually less trees and less vegetation. So these end up being kind of, particularly hot areas. And then in terms of green infrastructure, we need to kind of have, blue-green corridors to help our cities breathe and cool, and provide shelter for where people can go when it's hot. And also grey infrastructure solutions such as reducing vehicular traffic and things like installing cool or reflective pavements and roofs and making laws that kind of accelerate the way that buildings or, green roofs and things like that accelerate the uptake of those kind of measures. We want to see more investment up front in prevention to save like in the future, because this is, accelerating, and it's urgent that we make investments now to stop this kind of cycle of managing by disaster and actually manage in a kind of more long-term planned way.
What happens if we don't make the changes that you've laid out in your report?
Well, unfortunately, I think the answer is that in the future, more people are likely to die in this case of extreme heat. One of the things that we draw attention to in the report is the potential for an extreme heat event to coincide with power outages, which actually more likely to happen during extreme heat events because the demand for kind of cooling can coincide with when there's actually less efficient transfers of electricity. So we might see power outages. And if people are in kind of tower blocks where the lifts are not working, water cannot be pumped to upper floors, and the air conditioning is down, then it could be a recipe for disaster. So, we want to prepare for that and make sure that we avoid that kind of situation.
There is so much more in this report that we weren't able to talk about, but I thank you for talking to us today.
Thank you so much.